My name is Brendan Duff. I'm from Parkland, Florida. I'm a co-founder of the March for Our Lives movement.
My name is Delaney Tarr. I am also from Parkland, Florida, and I'm also a co-founder of the March for Our Lives movement.
My name is Louis Duncan Key. I am from Alberta, Canada, and I'm the National Director of Marketing for Pflag Canada.
I'm Nandini Jami, and I'm an organizer and founding member of Sleeping Giants.
It's really exciting for us. We usually talk to groups of teenagers, groups of young activists, students trying to get involved. So to have the opportunity to shift the lens and talk to, try to inspire corporate activism, a little bit different at the same channel, was really exciting to have that kind of influence and to say, this is what other companies are doing, this is what other brands are doing. Maybe there's a place for your brand in here as well.
Yeah, there's a quieter influence, I think, in brands that we don't necessarily think of most of the time. I mean, of course, there's impressive influence in celebrities and in grassroots movements and in politicians and all of that and public figures, but brands are something that we subconsciously consume constantly. We're not really aware of it, but when we see these messages and when we see these stances, we're factoring it into our everyday lives because it's something that we're literally consuming every day.
I mean, I actually thought it was really interesting, and I'm going to talk about, just in terms of us as a panel, I'm a little bit older than you. But I thought it was really interesting because the way that, I consume media and the way that, and I was born in kind of the midst of the digital age where things just started to blow up. So I'm aware of both, and it was just so interesting for me to see and hear about what activism means to you and the way that you go about doing it, because it's very different from, kind of my perception of what my limitations would be. So I thought that just kind of, and clearly we aligned with our overall beliefs, right? But we were just coming at it from very different ways, which I thought was really enlightening.
That's interesting, yeah.
I think it's just really interesting to see how our movements have all sort of been intersecting over the past several months and over the past several years. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big takeaway of the panel was that brands, we're holding them accountable. We're in a generation that is holding brands accountable in a way that hasn't really been done before. Absolutely. Because of this socially conscious consumer. It's the new type of consumer that we're seeing, and it's largely it is the younger generations that are just kind of growing into becoming this consuming demographic. And really they're picking things not just for the product, but for their beliefs, like you said, for their moral compass and for what they believe is the right thing to do. And I think that's leading to a much more selective and a much more decisive way of choosing what you're going to purchase and what you're going to consume. And I think that, of course, brands play a huge role in it when they take these stances, and I think that we can play a huge role in it too.
Yeah, and even from a business perspective, we have so much access to so many options, right? In a way, when you see a brand that's being authentic and is so in line with what their purpose is and their actions in kind of, delivering that is genuine, and, I think to your point, consumers now, young consumers are probably the smartest they've ever been. You have access to so much information. People can tell the difference, right? And so I think it's really important that brands, to your point earlier, you don't have to do it in the way that doesn't make sense to you. You have to find a way to incorporate, whatever issue you're being faced with and understand how that works in your own specific way.
We're running out of space, I think, for lip service activism and slactivism, as it's often called, where it is very much that look how supportive we are. We talked about it, or we tweeted about it, or we put it in our profile picture. We made a bad commercial that ultimately didn't have anything to it, but we feel like we did something because we are paying lip service to whatever social issue is prevalent right now. And I think that, like you said, we can tell, and it's very much we have enough information and we have enough access to information to tell when there are these companies doing good work and when they're not. And I think that's a really beneficial skill that we all have is RPS detectors, essentially, where we can just really sniff it out and we know what to choose because it's very clear at this point.
And the payback is way more than you would expect, right? But it's not necessarily short term, because to cultivate that relationship on an emotional level that really isn't rational, that's something that is long term. And it's done through consistent actions, and it's done through consistent behavior, and it's not a one-off. But I think when you actually, and that's the difference between turning a customer into a brand ambassador, right? They're two very different types of people. It's not rational, and it's generational, right? I will pass down to my kids, the brands that I believe in and what they stand for, and they probably will do the same.
Yeah.
So it's more of a quality over quantity, I would say.
It is because they're literally they're investing in their consumers now because these are customers that'll end up being like lifelong, and like you said, generations after that, when they're really just engaging us now, when we're literally just aging into that group that will be able to start spending money on these products, that's when that is a strategic decision, but it is also a genuine decision, I think, that is very much long term, and it's not about that quick payoff of just like targeting the people that you know can buy it right now.
Right.
It's
an
genuinely
investment.
It's an investment. It's
Yeah.
an investment socially and fiscally.
I agree.
I do think that it was the growth of social media that kind of lent itself to people creating this culture of accountability. It was the opportunity to have access to information, to communication channels with these companies that we haven't necessarily had before. It was very much one-sided. It was, here's our product, buy it or don't buy it. That's pretty much, that's end of discussion. But now it's engaging them. It's having actual social media platforms for fast food companies that are communicating with their customers on a daily basis, engaging with them, asking them what we can do better, and really just creating a dialogue. And I think that dialogue was created largely in part because of social media, because of this new era of politics that's engaging so many other people that haven't really felt spoken to before. And it is very much, it's a cultural shift that we've noticed, and I think it's still happening. I think we're very much in the process of a cultural shift right now. There's brands that are taking stances that in ways that never would have happened before, specifically on voting. Voting campaigns, while they have existed before, haven't really been this prevalent, or at least to young people, I think. I think that they haven't been targeted towards young people enough in a way that is actually speaking to them. But it's very much this large countrywide cultural shift that we're noticing. And it did take a few years, and it's still a work in progress, but I think it hasn't been one moment, I think it's just been over time.
I think it's a lot about the access to this information now, and on social media, just people sharing, and a lot of times you assume that the brand is doing the right thing, or you assume that the brand is consistent and efficient, but now it's not enough to just offer a cool, unique product, you know what I mean? And you have to feel good about buying it too. You have to know that you're contributing to something that's actually worthwhile and something that's not going to harm or do a disservice to any kind of other group.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's also, it's very much, it's not about how much you're willing to spend on them now. It is every customer of their company has access to communicate with them, and it's not just these large investors or these people who can sign a giant paycheck. It's the everyday consumer. It's the people who are buying it who might not necessarily be from that higher bracket of income. And I think that it's making it much more accessible to understand where your brands are coming from and to actually like have them engage with you so that they can gain this perspective that's not, this is what we assume people want, or this is what we think that will be successful. It's people directly telling them, this is what we want, this is what we need, this is how you can be the most successful.
I think it's a direct reflection of our political climate, right? Like, we've reached a stage where gray no longer is acceptable. It's very black and white now, right? And because for human rights issues, you know, you were either for or you were against. Gray is no longer an acceptable answer for, I think, today's youth, right? It's like, it's pretty clear. And so I think that's really forced, you know, brands to really have to choose a side, because if you don't choose a side, you're essentially a part of the problem.
Yeah, you're complacent. And
Right?
I think complacency is a huge issue that we've noticed, not just in brands, but in our country. And I think that when we've been pushing this narrative of if you're not with us, you're against us, it's really important, because it's not just, it's showing that you can't just sit idly by and just be a witness to this, because that's making you just as bad as everyone else. And I think that's
It's bold.
It's bold,
but it's necessary.
and it's
now.
aggressive.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to be aggressive during times like this. It's more important now than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the world of online advertising, it turns out there is no neutrality, because you're either advertising on websites like Breitbart or you're not.
Exactly.
So you're either giving them money or you're not doing it. So we've had to, you know, brands have had to come out and make a stand when they weren't even sort of about an issue that they weren't even aware of. We want to help you be better, do better by your customers, do better by your employees, and by your brand.
And that phrase, do better, is important, because when we talk about forgiveness, we're not talking about forgiving their apology. We're talking about forgiveness in terms of them changing their actions and them shifting the way that they're addressing their consumers, the way that they're advertising, the people they're giving money to. That's what we're going to forgive, is when they actually make that tangible change, not when they just say, oh, I'm sorry, oh, we didn't know, because ultimately that doesn't mean anything. That is just, it's empty, and we need actual actions to speak for them.
Because it's okay to not know, and it's okay to make a mistake, right? But once you know, there is a next step, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of like, what now? And what I think consumers, not speaking about it from your standpoint, but from a consumer standpoint, if I had a brand that didn't know, that's fine. I would be kind of putting them under a microscope to understand what the next steps were, because I think that would tell me more about how they function than anything.
Exactly. That's when all the eyes are on them, and that's, I think, the most indicative moment of their moral compass is when it's like, that sucks. We had no idea, but this is the easiest option for us, so we're just gonna stay here.
Exactly.
That's when it's like, okay, so maybe this isn't something that we want to keep contributing to.
Exactly.
Actually, some brands really surprised us the way that they reacted when they learned that they were advertising on Breitbart. They came out and they used it as an opportunity to affirm their values, their inclusive values, their commitment to diversity.
That would be a great outcome.
And
Best case
it's starting a conversation. It's giving them the opportunity to create a stance and to actually show that they're what they believe in. Like, that is a dialogue that is so important to have, because it's in a way it's putting pressure on them. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to put pressure on people when they don't know. It's so important to just raise awareness. But oftentimes when we had Laura Ingram's advertisers, one of our colleagues, David Hogg, he started a boycott against them because they were consciously funding money to a woman that was spewing hate speech. And that was like, there's so many different tactics that are being used that it is us directly taking a stance and taking part in this process. It's not just us consuming, it's us deciding who gets to consume it, deciding what audience this is, and like what is the right thing to do. And it's very powerful that we can do that now, and I think that it's probably the most indicative of where our country is at.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is you were talking about the different ways that it applies, right? I'm thinking back to the work that we've been doing with Destination Bride, and essentially, we're pulling thousands of data points from all around the world, and it breaks it down into 6 different categories. So we're giving people the information, and governments and cities with the information of marriage equality is scoring great, but your gender identity protection laws are at 12, right? And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, we're not telling you that you're a bad place to go to. We're not telling people that they shouldn't go there, but we're saying this is what's actually happening. Now that you know about this, what are you going to do about it, right?
Exactly.
And it's a totally different approach, but it's the exact same concept. Enlightening someone of what's wrong is completely acceptable. But it's about how do you synthesize that information?
Yeah, because ultimately it's not our responsibility to tell brands what to do. It's
No.
for brands to make decisions that are in aligning with their audience, aligning with their message. Like, it is not our job to give them this outline to say, here's the plan, follow it, because we're the consumers here. You need to understand, and you need to listen to us and what we think, and then ultimately make the decision yourself, because that is what they need to do. That is their power. That is a power that we don't have, that we can't take from them, because that is the telltale sign of whether or not they're actually caring about their audience.
I think a lot of people, what's worse than people that are taking stands in opposite directions are people that don't care, and people that are like complacent and just are going to continue their habits as normal, even once they know and once they are aware, and just kind of it doesn't really matter to them.
It's the gray. We can't have room for gray anymore. It needs to be very much, you need to decide, you need to say something, because when you stay silent, that's the biggest sign, I think. That is the worst thing that you could do, is stay silent, be complacent. And we've seen it in every walk of life, not just in brands, but in people too. And we're becoming this culture now that is really just showing that complacency isn't an option, that it isn't an okay thing to do. It is literally like, it's just as bad.
You're only allowed to be gray if you're Christian Grey. If you're shades of gray.
Well, there you go.
So a challenge that we're having just with Pflag is we've created this amazing tool. It's gotten so much kind of global recognition. And I think with the intent of it not being, the tool wasn't based off of being used for advocacy, right? It really was kind of built to solve a problem. And now that we're having so much engagement and the tool has a global reach, we're now trying to figure out how do we kind of move forward with the information we have, and how do we empower decision makers and influencers to actually go and look at what things can be improved upon in their region as it relates to LGBTQ plus acceptance and inclusiveness. So it's definitely not an easy task, and it's not like a one-day solution, but we're working with different groups to kind of figure out what that process looks like.
As for us, we've been working now for nearly 2 years to diligently, one by one, have advertisers, alert advertisers that they're appearing on Breitbart and other racist and white supremacist bigoted sites. The challenge that we're facing now is that we need a bigger solution. We can't continue this forever. We can't go after every single brand one by one. What we want now is to see companies, platforms like Facebook and Google take responsibility for the brands, for their customers, essentially, to keep them safe. So each of them have terms and conditions, policies that are supposed to prevent brands from appearing alongside hate speech and harassment and so on. However, they're not enforcing them. So what we'd like to see is these companies take responsibility for where their customers, or for how their customers are doing. And we'd love to see brands actually speak up on behalf of consumers who clearly have spoken up. And again, over 4,000 advertisers have left Breitbart, and that's really, for us, proof of concept. We've proven our point, and now we need the big companies to take over and come up with the real solution.
I think you really have to think about what are the types of audience members and consumers that make sense for any business, right? And I would guess that loyal, long-term, dedicated, people that believe in you as a business are way more valuable than someone that's just passing by and is buying a product. And so I think the only way that you can do that is really to go back to your reason for being, which is the why. It has nothing to do with the what. People don't just buy things because it's what they need. They're buying into a way of living and a way of believing now. And so I think, if you want to kind of cultivate those connections, you really do have to, I think you have to go back to your own kind of business and actually think about that and have that conversation with the entire organization, because that reason for being should permeate into how you talk to people, into customer service, into the products that you're offering and how they're sourced. Like, it really is an overall moral compass. I think the simplest way of explaining that is, what type of consumers do you want and how loyal do you want them to be to you? Because that's really the only way of doing it.